Glad to be here. I'm a San Carlos local, not a native, but I've lived here for about 23 years now. Um, and I brought my kids to the museum many times over the years. They're teenagers now, so they're not quite as interested, but certainly when they were younger, we spent a lot of time there. So it is an honor to be speaking with all of you here tonight and to share a little bit of our story or my story with the Hillary community. If it's all right with you, I'll just jump right into it and give a little spiel.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Jeff asked me to come here tonight to speak about my experiences making a naval aviation documentary. My personal background, I think, I don't know if this jacket shows up, but I usually wear it when I give these kind of presentations because it's my little suit of armor. It gives me a sense of comfort in history. But I was a naval aviator for 20 years, right out of college, ROTC in college at Boston University. Went right into Navy flight school. I flew A6s and F-14s active duty for about 10 years. And those patches are represented here. This is what naval aviators do. They decorate their flight jackets with their experiences. Once I got off active duty after about 10 years, I got hired as an airline pilot at Delta. And concurrent to that, I started flying F-5s as an adversary out in Fallon with VFC 13. And I did that for a further 10 years. So that's my 20 years. As an adversary in the Navy or as a pilot in the Navy, you fly a lot. It's not like traditional reservists where you just do a week in a month and a couple weeks a year. I flew 7 to 10 days every month for about 10 years. So I got a ton of hours, a ton of experience, and it was really fun and valuable time in my life. And that's what led me to create this documentary. I've been involved in storytelling and writing basically my whole life, ever since I was a little kid. And I tended to view my experiences in the Navy through sort of the lens of a storyteller, even when I was, a younger man. And when it was almost over, say about 5 years remaining, I really wanted to be able to tell the story of naval aviation with some sort of authority and authenticity in a way that had never been done before. Up to the time that my documentary came out, the most, and even really now, the most common touchstone for people with naval aviation is the movie Top Gun. And then people who wanted to dig a little bit deeper would go to, Discovery Wings and watch all the documentaries about missiles and planes and stuff like that. And I wanted to be able to bring the story of the people that I knew and loved and the planes that I knew and loved and that lifestyle to a wider audience. And it took me a while to come up with the formula that actually is, the mature version of the documentary. I wrote a bunch of screenplays and tried to get a film made. Hollywood and I didn't get along, which is fine. And then one day I saw a surfing documentary with a friend of mine. I don't surf, but I saw this documentary and it really struck me that the way they told this story about these people who loved what they did and who just pulled you into their world, coupled with the style of the filmmaking, just the gorgeous cinematography, really made me feel that I was a part of that experience. And so I left that movie theater and I called a friend of mine up right away, literally on the sidewalk outside. And I said, I want you to make a documentary with me about fighter pilots in the Navy. My friend is a director, she's a filmmaker, and she is the diametric opposite of somebody who would be interested in not only aviation, but naval aviation. She's a female from San Francisco who is an artist, and those things don't generally mesh with, fighter pilots and, that sort of community. But I convinced her to come out to Fallon, Nevada, and bring her camera. And over the course of a long weekend, she caught a glimmer of what I was trying to show her and what I was hoping to share with the world. I'm going to share with you, and forgive me, it's going to take a little bit of machinations here. So I'll start off by doing the screen share, but I'm going to share with you the trailer for the documentary. I think it's somewhere in here. Let's see. All right, here is the trailer for the film Speed and Angels. And this is the completed documentary.
We're not hearing sound, I don't think, Paco, but that's okay.
Mm.
We weren't able to hear any sound on it, but we were able to see it.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Sorry about that. At least I wasn't. I mean, if you out there in the audience want to add to the chat, let me know if you were able to hear the sound or not. But I wasn't sure that we were getting it.
Oh, that's too bad. Let me see. I got to find my way back to the camera. There we are. Well, you know, I'm clearly not a Zoom expert, but that was, you know, the completion of what was a 5-year journey. If you want to watch the trailer with sound on it later, just go to Speed and Angels at Google, or Google the trailer itself, and you'll be able to hear all the expletives that were coming out of the people's mouths. But anyway, that was the culmination of the idea that was germinated that day on a sidewalk. And the story of how we got from A to B in a 5-year period is actually a pretty fun and intense story. The hardest part, well, I guess there are a ton of difficult things, but one of the very first difficult thing was to convince my friend to jump on board and be interested in directing a film about pilots. And as I mentioned, once I got her out there and it piqued your curiosity a little bit, we had a long talk about story, because she's a storyteller, a visual storyteller, and you know, I was more of a writing storyteller. And I tried to explain to her what it was that I wanted to bring across. You know, that the passion, the dedication, the sort of the vocational lifestyle that, you know, people in that community have, coupled with just the inherent drama of jet engines and jet airplanes and flying and catapults and aircraft carrier landings. So there's a great blend of you know, human interest story and just really juicy visuals that we could bring together. And once she got on board with that, the next step was to go and talk to my commanding officer in my squadron and say, hey, listen, we're going to try and do this documentary. I want to do it on the up and up, but before I do that, I actually need something to bring to the Navy, bring to investors. Do you mind if I bring a couple cameras on board some flights and create like a little bit of a sizzle reel and bring Peyton in here to film some of the guys for a couple weeks. Peyton is the director, thank God he said yes. I think most CEOs in the Navy would say no. There's a real inbred distrust to media, to being on TV, to being in front of a camera. Most people just kind of clam up. But I'd known my CEO for a long time, and he trusted me. And my squadron mates ended up trusting me, even though it took a long time. And I think nobody wants to be on camera because that's forever, right? You say something on film and it lasts forever. And you don't want to be taken out of context, and you don't want to be made fun of by your peers, which I think is, very legitimate concern for people, in a squadron like an F-14 or an F-5 squadron. I'm going to refer to some of my notes here as we roll along. So again, once we got some footage, we were able to put together a sizzle reel, which I think is actually a standalone, a really interesting piece of video. I have it queued up, but apparently nobody heard the audio from the last time. So if you want to check it out, and I recommend checking it out because it's really well done. Peyton did it. Go and Google. I'll show you anyway. Let's see. Pardon this for a second. Here we go. Google the last of the dogfighters. And this is the 12-minute sizzle reel that we put together to show the Navy and to show the investors the film that we were thinking of making. We were able to get a fair amount of footage just by being on the base. I was able to go up in the 2-seat F5 with a camera and take a bunch of really cool footage. But we put together the nucleus of a story that was able to embody the things that we wanted to be able to tell, the world. Again, it's not a hardware story. It's not a chest thumping story like Top Gun. It's a story about the real people and the real experiences that they have flying these amazing airplanes and their appreciation for it, and the passion for what they do. So it's super fun to watch. You'll appreciate it. My wife, who is a Bay Area denizen, she works in tech. She's featured in this, and she's able to bring some comic relief about how her life went versus my life. Going out to the desert and flying F5s. We call each other at night and speak about how our days went. And she's like, yeah, I did this PowerPoint presentation. I said, oh, that's great. I was in a dogfight with 3 F-18s, going supersonic. Good night. I'll talk to you tomorrow. So it's a cool video. And like I said, it shows where we began. And, one of the interesting things about telling a story, and especially telling a documentary story, is that it's a live thing. It's like a child or something that grows. It has a life of its own. And we began the story or the concept of the documentary by focusing on this very unique squadron that I was in, VFC 13 out in Fallon, where all we did was dogfight. We were aerial adversaries, aerial bandits, and we concentrated on dogfighting and being the bad guy. And I thought that was just such a compelling thing to share, such a great story that it would be an amazing documentary. And that's where we began. And then in the course of filming the documentary, Peyton came with me out to, in the squadron, out to Key West, Florida, where we met our students. And she sat in the van with them, riding back and forth to the base. And she was just struck by how excited and energetic and electric these 23, 24-year-old kids were as they were on their way out to fight, 40-year-old gray-haired people. That it quickly changed, within the course of a day or two. It changed the course of the story from focusing on, the monkish adversaries that lived in the desert to a year in the life of these young kids who are basically graduating flight school at the age of 22 years old, or 23 maybe. And they're freshly winged aviators. They've achieved that objective that they've spent probably 10 years of their lives trying to achieve. And in the course of 9 to 10 months, they're going to go from sort of exaggerated college graduates to people that are placed in danger, representing their country, flying in real combat situations with live missiles and bombs, with a huge amount of responsibility. So there's this window of transformation where they develop from one thing to the next. And that's just gold for storytellers. You'd love to have this arc of a story, and here it is given to us on a platter. So it took a little convincing for me, because I was really set on doing this great dogfighting documentary. But Peyton finally convinced me that this was the way that the story should go. And obviously she turned out to be 100% correct. But you fall in love with these kids very, very quickly. Their enthusiasm is infectious. And you go along with them on their journey from learning how to fly the F-14, learning how to dogfight it against the adversaries, going through all the steps to become naval aviators, and then going to their final exam, graduation, which is landing on the aircraft carrier, both day and night, which is, it's a feature of the film. It's what we at the time thought was going to be the culmination, the dramatic conclusion of the film. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but there was a lot of stuff. This documentary we thought was going to take about 1.5 years to 2 years ended up end to end taking 5 years, because one of the big factors is what the two kids that we ended up following gave us after they finished their training and went out into the fleet. We call it the real world of being fighter pilots. Along the way, during the course of filming the documentary, we had our own sets of drama. We were the first independent film or documentary that was ever approved by the Department of Defense, which was great. I mean, it's a huge honor, and I don't think it would have worked. It wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have been, representing. I hadn't have been a reservist at the time and able to sort of assure the Navy that I wasn't going to do anything wrong. Because once they give you permission to film, they can't edit you afterwards. They can't say, "Oh, we don't want you showing that." Once you're given permission, it's a carte blanche. You can go wherever you want, film whatever you want, and edit it as you see fit. So the ability to get permission from the DoD to film that kind of stuff is very limited. And they usually go with trusted sources, major production companies or television distributors that they know are not going to screw them because they want future business. So it took a little bit of convincing up the chain of command and assurances. And then what I discovered was that there's two separate authorities that deal with giving permission. There's in Washington, D.C., there's the folks that deal with the documentary side. So the permissions to go and interview people on bases and aircraft carriers and stuff like that, who were very eager actually for us to tell the story. And it was no skin off their nose. They just gave us a letter and said, "Sure, go and film these kids, and we trust that you'll do a good job." But the other half of the film that I mentioned earlier is that we wanted to have phenomenal eye candy, phenomenal footage that rivaled Top Gun, and that the permission for that comes from Los Angeles, from the Hollywood division of the Chief of Information Office, and they were brutal. It was a classic Hollywood story of just banging on their door and getting told no, I would very politely say, do you mind if I go talk to your boss? And I had to work my way up the chain of command. And it literally took 2 years before I could see the admiral in charge of all things that fly in the Navy. It's called the Air Boss. As a 4-star admiral in San Diego. And I mean, it was just like cutting my way through swaths of red tape and no's and, may I please speak to your boss? And I finally was able to meet with his chief of staff, and I gave him like a 30-minute brief as to what we wanted to shoot and how we were going to shoot it. Very, very detailed documentation of all the maneuvers we're going to do. We had hired, or we're planning on hiring at the time, a Learjet, like they did in Top Gun, with special cameras on the top and the bottom. And we had some locations, mountaintop locations, that we wanted to film from. And we wanted to stick cameras in the airplanes themselves. And all that was, the Navy was very skeptical about the ability to do that, as an independent production, right? Not with a multi-million dollar budget from some Hollywood production company. But once I was able to brief the chief of staff, and the next day I went in to brief the admiral himself, and I showed him the sizzle reel, the last of the dogfighters, and I explained to him our intent. And it took maybe 15 minutes, after 2 years of banging my head up against the wall. I spoke with the man, and he looked at me, and he looked at his staff, and he said, I think this is a good story. And he, I'll never forget, he gave the 2 thumbs up. It was a huge relief, but it was also super stressful because the F-14, which was the other star of our film, was about to go away. In 2006, September of 2006, the plane was getting retired. And I met with the admiral in April. So we had one chance where the F-14s, the one last squadron of F-14s, were coming out to Fallon in June. One chance to get all the footage that we needed for the film. We scrambled like crazy. Thankfully, we had planned for the last year or so. And we were able to capture just some spectacular footage from the air, from other planes, and from the mountaintops using really, really great HD cameras. But that was just, I mean, it's like they always say, these endeavors, you take a step forward, a leap of faith, and you have no idea whether or not they're going to succeed, other than just your conviction that at some point, the wall's going to break and you're going to be able to make it work. So thankfully, all that did come together, and we were able to start editing the film. And the way we arrived at Jay and Meagan, the 2 protagonists that we show in the documentary, is a little bit of a meandering journey. We started off, as I mentioned, with Peyton down in Key West. And there was only 2 classes of F-14 pilots left, ever. And so there was about 10 pilots between the 2 classes. And we started following all 10 of them because they all had pretty good stories and they were all interesting kids. And when we started editing the film, I could follow who they were because I knew them. And I spent 20 years around people that all wear the same exact piece of clothing. So I could distinguish who they were. But it quickly became evident to Peyton and the editor that their stories became muddled because everybody looked essentially the same. They all looked the same. So we had to whittle them down. And once Peyton started digging into each individual kid, she learned the backstories of Jay and Meagan, and they became immediately compelling. And I don't want to give away too much, but Jay, his call sign was Face Shot because when he was a high school senior, he got literally shot in the face at a party, and the bullet went through his tongue and lodged into his spine, and he was at death's door and just barely was able to survive the experience. And that was just the beginning of the obstacles that he had to overcome. The Naval Academy didn't want to admit him because he was missing some blood flow up to his brain. And he had to get all kinds of doctors to help him get approval for that. And then once he graduated, they at first didn't want to let him into flight school. So he had to literally claw and fight his way just to get into Navy flight school, where he had a 90% chance of not succeeding. You know, once you learn that about somebody and you really learn a little bit about their backstory, you fall in love with their motivation. The female character, Meagan, we almost didn't have her as one of our protagonists because we didn't want necessarily to just throw a woman into the story because it seemed like it was too obvious. But if you get a chance to watch the film, you'll find out that she is magnetic and compelling and remarkable and just pops on screen and is so likable. You know, the snapshot of her backstory is that she was told that there was no chance that she would ever fly fighters. She came from a small town in Pennsylvania. Women weren't allowed to be fighter pilots when she decided at the age of 10 or 11 that that's what she wanted to do. But she literally tailored her life around achieving the goal of being not only a Navy pilot, but an F-14 pilot. That was her goal. And fortunately for her, the rules changed in '92. And she was able to, right after that, basically go off to the Naval Academy and begin her journey. And so once we settled on them and we followed them and we edited them, we went back to speak to them afterwards to get some follow-up information about their experiences after they had finished flight school, thinking that the film was over. And we found out that it was only about 2/3 over. Like really, the majority of the juicy stuff had happened after we thought their stories were over. And again, I don't want to give away too much, but Jay ends up finishing F-14 training and 10 days later going off straight to Iraq and being put into a combat situation where he is providing close air support for troops on the ground in an urban environment. And you saw a little bit of that in the trailer, and that's actual footage from his HUD camera and his lantern, the FLIR pod that was on his airplane. Peyton and I went out to the carrier to film his homecoming from his deployment from his perspective. So, you know, we landed on the ship on the COD, and we spent a night there. And I was speaking with Jay, and I'm like, so how's life? How's everything? It'll be cool to pull up to the pier tomorrow and see 5,000 people waiting for you on shore. And he said, look, I got to show you this video. And he pulled out a little 8mm tape and he stuck it in his video player, and he showed me the heads-up display video of his encounter in Iraq, and literally the hair on my arms stood up. I said, this is incredible. I don't know anybody. I've been flying for 20 years. And I don't know anybody who did this, and it happened to you 10 days after you finished training. This is really remarkable, and I need this video. And it took about 2 months to get him, to convince him to let me have the video. But he finally did, and it really provides like this incredible theatric culmination to the film. You know, the original video, the original audio, and we recreated the external shots with the F-14's shot from, you know, on our dime. But it really ties together really seamlessly, and it will give you chills, I think, if you're watching it, to know that while it feels very Hollywood, it's an actual encounter, and it's an actual thing. Excuse me. And Meagan, her story after she finished training is it's in some ways more interesting because it's more internal. It's not as compelling a visual, but it's a very interesting universal struggle. She had this incredible crisis of confidence. And the way I liken it is that, you know, everybody understands a golfer that has yips, or a baseball player that can't hit a ball anymore for some reason. And that's what happened to her. She was always she was top of her class all through training and all through F-14 flying. And she got out to the fleet, and all of a sudden, for some unknown reason, she was having difficulty landing on the ship, to the point where she was a danger to herself and to others. And she was probably 1 or 2 bad landings away from being kicked out of the Navy. And through some unbelievable mental feat, she was able to just lift herself up by her own bootstraps and convince herself that she was better than the way she was performing. And it's a really, to me, it's a very, it's an important story, and it's a very heartwarming story because, you know, I mean, who doesn't go through those moments in their lives where they're just fed up and they don't believe that they can achieve whatever it is that they want. And to be able to do what she did, again, out of the two kids, they both did things with their lives that I never saw anybody do. I saw plenty of people as a naval aviator lose their edge and lose their confidence in their ability to land on the ship. It's a scary thing to do, and you know, people die doing it all the time. And somehow Meagan was able to just change her mindset to the point where she became exceptional at it. So I never saw anybody do that. Everybody else I ever saw that hit that trajectory and got to the bottom either died or was, you know, pulled from flight duty. So it's a really important, I think, and universal story to watch her be able to make that transformation. The film took about 9 months to edit. A lot of it because we just had such a mass of video. We had 200 plus hours of documentary footage. And you know, you cobble together a story, or not cobble together, but you sculpt a story out of that. And it takes a while to, you know, eliminate the excess. And you know, we had probably 50 hours of flying footage that we had to piece together so that it made sense. It wasn't just pretty flying, it was flying that made sense in the course, in the context of the story. And it took, like I said, about 9 months. And once it was done, it was spectacular. One of the great things about being local is we got to do all our sound design up at Skywalker Ranch up in Marin. And they hosted the first viewing of the documentary in its completed form, you know, with all the color correction and all the editing done and all the audio and the sound design. You know, that one of my fondest memories is going up there as they're editing in the, you know, the flying footage, and a jet would fly by and the guy looks at me and I'm like, make it louder, make it louder. You know, it sounds better when it's louder. You know, it's such a great experience to do that. And then maybe 3 or 4 months later, when it's all done, it's all wrapped up, and they have this gorgeous theater up there with holds 1,000 people or something. We got to invite all our friends and family and investors and you know, people in the Navy, and it was really the culmination of just this half decade's work to see the film on the big screen with all the editing and sound done in its completed format. It just gave you the chills, and everybody obviously you know, enjoying it with us. Once that was over, we did the film festival circuit for about a year, and we won a bunch of awards, audience awards, and best documentary awards, variety of film festivals. And then we finally got distribution. Again, it was an independent documentary, so it was on us to pick up or get picked up for distribution. And it got picked up by Vivendi Media, which eventually sold it to Discovery Channel. So it had a nice national release, and then, you know, it was available on DVD and various formats for a number of years. And then about 3 years ago, I was able to get the rights to the documentary back. So Peyton and I, the director and I, own the film once again, and it's available on Amazon Prime and iTunes for rental, or if you're a Prime member, you can watch it for free. So it has, it still lives. You know, many thousands of people around the world watch it every month, which is amazing. You know, and every time there's a new drop of a trailer for the new Top Gun coming out, you know, our viewership spikes because the interest in the film and the F-14 drives viewership, and it's great. So it's a wonderful part of my life. I think it's a great documentary. It's a universal story that people are attracted to. Both Jay and Meagan, who are the protagonists, again, have something about them that makes people feel very close to them and very moved by their stories. And of course, it's got spectacular footage, aviation footage that that people love to watch. So that is it. That is the long and drawn out story of the making of the documentary Speed Angels.
That's fascinating, Paco. I know people have questions, so be sure to type them in the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to see if I can get things rolling a little bit. Paco, your name is Francesco, and Paco is your call sign. Is there a story about the call sign?
Oh, it's not even a good story. I've been called Paco since I was born. So I'm like the only naval aviator I know that didn't actually get a call sign. I just got called my nickname. So.
Well, speaking of nomenclature, Speed and Angels, that's an actual piece of formation nomenclature, I believe. What is the actual definition of that, Speed and Angels?
So Speed and Angels is what pilots say to each other when they're flying and they're about to begin a dogfight. So you have a setup or a standard pre-brief formation that you're going to execute the dogfight from, and say you're both at 15,000 feet at 350 knots, and speed means obviously speed, 350 knots, and angels is aviation, or at least military aviation, for altitude. So if you're at speed and angels, it means you're at the pre-briefed speed and altitude. And so one guy would say speed and angels on the right, the other guy says speed and angels on the left, 3, 2, 1, fights on. So we didn't know what to call the documentary for 4.5 out of the 5 years. And one day we're sitting in the editing room, and the editor is doing her thing, her dark magic over there with the editing suite. And Peyton and I were sitting in the background waiting to be asked our opinion about something and discussing what we should call this documentary, because our working title was not great. And the editor just turned around and goes, well, why don't we just call it Speed Angels? That's all I hear all the time as I'm pulling up all these videos. So it sounds really cool. So
the documentary is about 35 minutes. It's on Amazon Prime.
No, it's a 90-minute documentary.
Oh, it's 90 minutes.
It's a full length. Yeah.
Sorry, I guess it was an hour and 35 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
The other fighter pilot film that's out there that was released, I think, in 2004, that maybe a lot of people have seen, is Fighter Pilot, the Stephen Lowe IMAX film, which is an Air Force Operation Red Flag documentary. And so you've made this counterpart film for the Navy, essentially. Was there ever any thought that it might be something you wanted to do in a large format and get into an IMAX theater type thing, or what are your thoughts about, the video format that it's in?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been great. IMAX, you have to shoot in 135 millimeter, I think it is. Like, it's a huge, it's very expensive and unique roll of film. They didn't have, I don't think they had digital capability in 2004, 5, 6 when we were filming. That film that you talked about, Fighter Pilot or Air Force Fighter Pilot, whatever it was called, came out as we were just wrapping up our production, and nobody had heard of it. It was very stealth, and it just popped up. And it freaked us out because we thought, oh no, somebody's making a film exactly the same as ours. It's, this couldn't be worse. And we actually flew up to Seattle to watch that movie in the IMAX theater up there, because that's the only place it was showing when it first came out. And I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's pretty hokey. It's pretty cheesy. Obviously it's IMAX, so it's kind of cool to look at. But in terms of the the honesty and the reality, it's just horrible from our point of view. So we actually left Seattle quite relieved that our film was nothing like that one. Right.
Well, yeah, because that film is still out there. I mean, and it feels like Speed and Angels needs to take it over. Take the next level up, so that people can see an actual story of people getting through the Navy career. Yeah.
I mean, okay, good.
No. Yeah, I was going to ask, the logistics, and you hinted on it, but they must have been massive about getting onto an aircraft carrier, and how do they handle you being there and not getting underfoot, and you not getting underfoot and knowing how to maneuver on days of filming while they're either doing training, sorties, or whatever. You know,
Sure.
what is that kind of planning like?
Well, once we got permission to be there, everybody was amazing. So that, you know, that being on the ship, the people on the ship were fantastic. Um, the production itself was very, very small in terms of a footprint compared to most productions. So 99% of the time it was just Peyton and a handheld camera with a big boom mic on it. But whenever we wanted to film like really beautiful footage of airplanes or aircraft carriers, we would pull together the same crew. And we probably did it about a half dozen times over the 4 years of filming, where we would go to a different location, whether it was Key West or an aircraft carrier or two, or, you know, the big culmination where we shot the F-14s out in Fallon flying against the F-5s. But it was still pretty small. It was a cameraman and his assistant cameraman. And I did sort of the direction of that. So I was the, you know, aerial coordinator or director of the aerial events. There were maybe 4 people. So it was not a huge footprint. But the Navy was great. I mean, we have some shots on the bow of an aircraft carrier. And if I'm sure very few of you have been on one, but there are lines painted on the deck of the ship, and they're red lines, and they crisscross all over the place. It's kind of like you're driving up and down 101, and you know they've erased a few of the lines and put some new ones in, and it's very confusing as to where you should be to not be in danger and not encroach. And they would have a guy plant us right at the very edge of the safety zone, which essentially is just under the tip of the F-14 as it's launching off the carrier coming at you. And so we got this spectacular footage on the deck of these guys running around and the planes launching at us, and you know, the nozzles of the afterburners opening up, and the rumble. You can feel the rumble. It actually shakes the camera a little bit. So it was really magical once we were able to get on the ship itself and shoot some of that footage. You know, the access was spectacular.
Cool. Matteo and Vanessa Pacheco had a question for you. You know, you're a filmmaker, but you're also an author. What are the other projects that you're working on?
That's good. Well, I happen to have. I just got my first novel published last year. It's called Lions of the Sky. It's been very well received. You know, it's on Amazon. Is probably the easiest way to get whatever format you want. And that's probably my true love is writing versus filmmaking. And I just started writing the sequel to that. I'm about 50 or so pages, maybe 60 pages after today, writing the sequel to Lions of the Sky now.
Looking forward to that coming out. Getting back to the documentary, how did you determine the budget you need, and how did you go about finding the investors?
That's a great question. It was actually probably remarkably similar to a lot of the Bay Area experience. So the budget was done by what's called a line editor in the film world. You know, you tell them what you want to do, and they sort of sit there and, you know, clack away in their computer and come up with a big number at the end of it, because they know what it costs and how many people it takes to get, and the insurance it's going to cost, and rental cars and camera rentals and all that kind of stuff. So they plug all that stuff in and they give you a number, and you look at it and you're like, whoa, how can I trim back? So our budget was 3 times bigger than the average documentary, because the Navy had to charge us. They couldn't let us just film the airplanes for free. They had to charge us. It's against the law, even if they wanted to. So we were able to, if a plane was going on a normal mission, we could stick a camera in that airplane. And they wouldn't charge us for that. So we got a ton of great footage of pilots flying, you know, both external perspective and internal perspective, you know, down by their knees. And, you know, we have a lipstick camera on the helmet, which is while this guy's landing on the ship, you can see basically from his eye perspective what it looks like to have the ship coming up at you. But it costs $500,000 just to rent the F-14s and F-5s and the Learjet for a week. And that was a massive chunk of our budget. Editing was almost the same amount of money. And then everything else was, you know, the documentary aspect of it was free. We didn't have to pay, you know, the military folks, because they're not allowed to ask us for money or charge us. So really, it was just the cost of the airplanes itself. And if you ever want to know what it costs to rent an F-14, it's $14,500 an hour.
Does that include fuel?
Includes fuel, maintenance, yeah, all that kind of stuff. And the F-5s were only $3,000 an hour, so they were a relative bargain. And then to get the investment money or the working capital, we made that Sizzle Reel I spoke of, Last of the Dogfighters, and that was pretty much friends and family money, just scratching and, you know, pulling some money together just to edit that into something that we could show people. And then with that, I was introduced to some folks here in the Bay Area who were interested in jumping into the film world. And, you know, we found one guy who was our anchor investor, and he was able to bring in some of his partners as well. So that, you know, it's classic startup, you know, bootstrapping Bay Area story of raising money and getting things done.
Well, that's fantastic. Just again, to remind people, if you're curious about the documentary, Amazon Prime, which is free if you're a Prime member, and then iTunes are the two places where you can look at the documentary. Is it still out there on DVDs, or is it just? Not
really. No, I mean, I have a few, but it's not really for sale on DVD anymore.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I think actually you're somebody, Marion Harris, one of your board members, I believe, got 2 of my DVD copies to give you guys for your auction. So
that's right.
They're highly prized items.
Yes, they are. Very rare. Well, I'd like to thank our guest here, Paco Chierici, for this fascinating talk and a look into a behind the scenes effort to create a documentary using the assets of the Navy, which is an interesting challenge in and of itself. And we're looking forward to the release of Paco's new fiction work as a follow-up to his Lions of the Sky, or In the Sky. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it's definitely Lions in the Sky is a poetry book, so it's
that's right. So thank you, Paco, for the talk. We really appreciate it. And if you want to show your appreciation for Paco, use the reaction button on the bottom of your Zoom screen and give him a hand clap and a thumbs up, and let him know what you think about him. And we're going to make sure that his talk is uploaded to our Hiller Aviation Museum YouTube channel, so you'll be able to see it starting tomorrow if you want to watch his talk again. So look for those and other Hangar talks as well. So again, thank you for coming tonight, everyone. And I'd like to thank our sponsor, Provident Credit Union, and we look forward to seeing you in about 2 weeks for our next Hangar talk on Portals to the Sky, My Life as an Airport Manager with Gretchen Kelly. So until then, stay safe, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Good night.